At 60 years old, she stood before 12,000 entrepreneurs, her voice steady as steel, sharing strategies that built her billion-dollar healthcare empire. 6 years earlier, doctors told her she had 6 months to live. Victoria Chen had always been the type of person who scheduled her life down to the minute. At 54, she was a successful regional manager for a pharmaceutical company, working 12-hour days, missing family dinners, and believing that her worth was measured by her productivity. She lived in a comfortable suburban home, drove a reliable sedan, and had what most people would consider a stable, middle-class life. But stability became a luxury she could no longer afford when the persistent fatigue she'd been ignoring for months finally forced her into a doctor's office. What started as a routine checkup for what she assumed was burnout turned into a series of tests, scans, and increasingly serious conversations with specialists. The oncologist's office smelled like disinfectant and fear. Victoria sat across from Dr. Reynolds, a man who had delivered this type of news thousands of times before, yet still struggled to find the right words. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The timeline was 6 months, maybe 8 if she was lucky. The treatment options were limited, focused more on comfort than cure. Victoria's first thought wasn't about dying. It was about her daughter Emma, who was struggling through her second year of medical school, drowning in student debt, and barely making ends meet. It was about her elderly mother in the nursing home, whose care consumed most of Victoria's savings. It was about all the things she'd postponed, all the dreams she'd filed away under someday. The drive home from that appointment felt like moving through water. Every familiar landmark looked different, as if she was seeing her neighborhood through new eyes. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for 20 minutes, staring at her house, trying to understand how everything could look exactly the same when her entire world had just collapsed. That night, she called her daughter. Emma's voice cracked when Victoria shared the news, and they both cried quietly on opposite ends of the phone line. Emma wanted to drop out of medical school to spend time with her mother, but Victoria wouldn't hear of it. "You're going to be the doctor this family needs," she said, though she wondered if she'd live to see Emma graduate. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of medical appointments, insurance calls, and well-meaning visits from friends who didn't know what to say. Victoria had always been fiercely independent, but now she found herself dependent on others for rides to chemotherapy, help with grocery shopping, and emotional support she'd never needed before. The treatments were brutal. The chemotherapy left her weak and nauseous. Her hair fell out in clumps, and her appetite disappeared entirely. She lost 30 pounds in 2 months, and her reflection became foreign to her. The woman staring back from the mirror looked fragile, hollow, nothing like the competent professional she'd always been. But the worst part wasn't the physical deterioration. It was the financial hemorrhaging. Her insurance covered some of the treatment costs, but the copays, the experimental medications, the specialized consultations, they added up faster than she could track. She was burning through her retirement savings, her emergency fund, everything she'd worked 30 years to build. One particularly dark evening in November, Victoria sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by medical bills and bank statements. The math was brutal and simple. At the current rate of spending, she would be broke before she was dead. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She was spending her life savings to buy a few extra months of life, leaving nothing behind for the people she loved most. That's when something shifted inside her. Maybe it was the desperation, or maybe it was the clarity that comes when you have nothing left to lose. But Victoria began to see her situation differently. She'd spent decades in the pharmaceutical industry, watching companies profit enormously from the same treatments that were now bankrupting her. She understood the supply chains, the markup structures, the gaps between wholesale and retail pricing. She started making phone calls to former colleagues, not for sympathy or help, but for information. How much did her medications actually cost to produce? What were the real wholesale prices? Who were the distributors? And how did the pricing work at different levels of the supply chain? What she discovered made her angry, and for the first time in months, anger felt productive. The markup on her medications was enormous. In some cases, 3 to 5 times the wholesale cost. The system was designed to extract maximum profit from people at their most vulnerable moments, and she was living proof of how devastating that could be. December brought news that Victoria's treatment was showing some results. The tumors hadn't disappeared, but they had stopped growing. Doctor Reynolds was cautiously optimistic, using words like stabilized and manageable. Victoria had bought herself time, but at what cost? Her savings account showed a balance that made her stomach turn, and the monthly treatment expenses continued to mount. Instead of feeling relief, Victoria found herself consumed by a different kind of urgency. She'd been given a reprieve, but she was still trapped in a system designed to drain every dollar from people facing their mortality. The unfairness of it burned in her chest. But more than that, she began to see an opportunity that nobody else seemed to notice. During one of her chemotherapy sessions, she struck up a conversation with another patient, an elderly man named Robert, who was struggling with the cost of his heart medications. He was rationing his pills, taking them every other day instead of daily, because he couldn't afford the full prescription. His story was heartbreaking, but it also confirmed what Victoria was beginning to understand. She wasn't alone in this financial nightmare. Victoria started keeping a notebook during her treatments, writing down stories from other patients, documenting the impossible choices people were making between their health and their financial survival. A woman with diabetes who was diluting her insulin. A man with high blood pressure who was buying his medications from online pharmacies of questionable legitimacy. A young mother with an autoimmune condition who was choosing between her treatment and her children's school expenses. Each story reinforced Victoria's growing conviction that the current system was fundamentally broken and that someone needed to find a better way. The question that kept her awake at night wasn't whether she would survive her cancer. It was whether she could build something that would help others survive the financial devastation of serious illness. She began researching everything she could about pharmaceutical distribution, online pharmacies, and international medication sourcing. Her background in the industry gave her insights that most people didn't have, and her desperation gave her the motivation to dig deeper than she ever had before. Victoria discovered that many medications available in the United States were manufactured in the same facilities that produced identical drugs sold in other countries for a fraction of the US price. The same insulin that cost $300 in America was available in Canada for $40. The same heart medication that bankrupted seniors was sold in Europe for pennies on the dollar. The regulatory frameworks were complex, but not impossible to navigate. There were legal pathways for importing medications, especially for personal use, and there were established networks of international pharmacies that operated within regulatory guidelines. The challenge wasn't legality. It was logistics, verification, and trust. One evening in January, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. Instead of seeing herself as a victim of an unfair system, she would become someone who offered an alternative. She would create a bridge between patients and affordable medications, using her industry knowledge to navigate the complex regulatory landscape and her personal experience to understand what people really needed. The idea started simple. What if she could help other patients access the same quality medications she was taking, but at the wholesale prices she knew were possible? What if she could create a service that cut through the insurance bureaucracy and connected people directly with affordable treatment options? Victoria's daughter Emma was home for winter break, and they spent hours talking through the concept. Emma's medical school training gave her insights into the clinical side of the equation, while Victoria's pharmaceutical experience covered the business logistics. Together, they began sketching out what would eventually become a revolutionary approach to medication access. The first challenge was credibility. Who would trust a cancer patient with no business credentials to handle their life-saving medications? Victoria realized she needed to start small, with people who knew her personally, and build trust through results rather than promises. She started with Robert, the heart patient from chemotherapy. His monthly medication cost was $847 through his insurance plan. Victoria researched his specific medications and found equivalent versions available through a licensed Canadian pharmacy for $94. She offered to handle the importation process, the regulatory paperwork, and the quality verification for a small service fee. Robert was skeptical but desperate. His choice was between trusting Victoria or continuing to ration medications that kept him alive. He agreed to try it for 1 month. Victoria spent 2 weeks navigating international pharmacy verification, FDA personal importation guidelines, and customs requirements, When Robert's medications arrived, properly packaged and verified for authenticity, he cried. Word spread quietly through the chemotherapy center. Other patients began asking Victoria questions, sharing their own financial struggles, wondering if she could help them too. Victoria realized she had stumbled onto something much bigger than she had initially imagined. By March, she was helping 12 people access affordable medications. She wasn't making much money, just enough to cover her own expenses and the time she was investing, but she was making a real difference in people's lives. More importantly, she was proving that an alternative to the current system was possible. The work gave Victoria a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Every successful medication delivery, every dollar saved for a struggling family, every person who didn't have to choose between their health and their financial security felt like a victory against the system that had nearly destroyed her. But Victoria was thinking bigger. She was starting to envision a company that could scale this model, that could help thousands of people instead of dozens, that could become a legitimate alternative to the current pharmaceutical distribution system. Spring brought more than just warmer weather. It brought Victoria's first real business challenge. Word about her medication service had spread beyond the chemotherapy center, and she was getting calls from people across the city. The informal system she'd built to help a dozen people was completely inadequate for the 50-plus requests she was now receiving every week. Victoria's kitchen table had become mission control for what was rapidly becoming a real business. She had file folders organized by patient, medication type, and supplier, but the system was chaotic and unsustainable. She was working 16-hour days, managing international suppliers, navigating regulatory requirements, and providing customer service to people whose lives literally depended on her getting things right. The stress was enormous, but it was different from the helpless desperation she'd felt during the early days of her diagnosis. This was productive stress, the kind that comes from building something meaningful. Her latest medical tests showed continued stability, and Dr. Reynolds had started using words like long-term management instead of terminal prognosis. Emma had graduated from medical school and was starting her residency, but she spent her free time helping her mother build systems for what they now called MedBridge Solutions. Emma's medical knowledge was crucial for verifying medication equivalencies and understanding drug interactions, while Victoria's pharmaceutical industry experience guided the business logistics. The first major decision they faced was whether to formalize the business or keep it as an informal service. Victoria was making enough money to cover her own medical expenses and support her mother's nursing home care, but she wasn't building wealth. More importantly, she was starting to understand the legal complexities of operating in the pharmaceutical space without proper business structure. They decided to incorporate in June. Victoria used her remaining savings to hire a healthcare attorney and establish the proper licensing for pharmaceutical importation services. The legal costs were significant, but Victoria knew that credibility and compliance were essential for scaling the business. The second challenge was systems. Victoria couldn't continue managing everything manually, and she needed to establish processes that could handle growth while maintaining the personal service that was attracting customers. She hired her first employee, a former colleague from the pharmaceutical company, who understood both the regulatory environment and the technical requirements of medication verification. By August, MedBridge Solutions was helping over 200 people access affordable medications. Victoria had established relationships with licensed pharmacies in Canada, Australia, and several European countries. She had developed verification protocols that ensured medication authenticity and quality. Most importantly, she had created a customer service system that treated every client like a person, not a number. The financial impact was becoming significant. Victoria's average client saved $400 per month on their medications, and many saved much more. She was helping families avoid bankruptcy, seniors maintain their independence, and chronically ill people access life-saving treatments without choosing between medication and rent. But Victoria's vision was expanding beyond individual medication access. She was starting to see opportunities in the broader healthcare cost crisis. Her clients weren't just struggling with medication costs. They were dealing with expensive medical procedures, diagnostic tests, and specialty treatments that were financially devastating even with insurance. Victoria began researching medical tourism, direct pay surgical options, and international healthcare services. She discovered that many routine procedures available in the United States for tens of thousands of dollars could be performed by qualified physicians in other countries for a fraction of the cost. In September, she helped her first client access surgery abroad. A woman named Patricia needed a knee replacement that would cost $45,000 through her U.S. insurance plan, with an $8,000 deductible. Victoria connected her with a certified orthopedic surgeon in Costa Rica, who performed the same procedure for $12,000, including travel and recovery accommodations. Patricia's successful surgery opened Victoria's eyes to the broader possibilities. She wasn't just running a medication import business. She was creating a comprehensive alternative to the entire healthcare cost structure that was crushing American families. By the end of the year, MedBridge Solutions had helped over 800 clients save more than $2.3 million in healthcare costs. Victoria had hired 4 employees and moved operations out of her kitchen into a small office space. She was no longer just surviving her cancer diagnosis. She was building something that could help thousands of other people survive their own healthcare crises. The personal transformation was as dramatic as the business growth. Victoria had discovered reserves of energy, creativity, and determination that she didn't know she possessed. The woman who had once measured her worth by her productivity as a pharmaceutical company employee was now measuring her impact by the lives she was changing and the financial disasters she was preventing. Emma often marveled at her mother's transformation. The frail, defeated woman who had received a death sentence 3 years earlier had become a dynamic entrepreneur who worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that time was precious and impact was everything. But Victoria wasn't satisfied with helping hundreds of people. She was starting to envision a company that could help millions, that could fundamentally disrupt the healthcare cost structure, and that could prove that providing affordable healthcare access was not only possible, but profitable. The foundation was built, the systems were working, the demand was proven. Now Victoria was ready to scale. The breakthrough moment came in January of Victoria's 4th year after diagnosis. She was reviewing client feedback when she noticed a pattern that would change everything. Her most satisfied customers weren't just saving money on individual medications or procedures. They were the ones who had used MedBridge solutions for multiple healthcare needs over time. Victoria realized she had been thinking too small. Instead of helping people solve individual healthcare cost problems, she needed to create a comprehensive alternative to the entire American healthcare system. This insight led to the development of what she called the Total Health Access Model, a membership-based system that would revolutionize how people approached healthcare costs. The idea started with a simple question. What if instead of treating each medical need as a separate crisis, Victoria could help people plan and budget for their healthcare the same way they planned for any other major expense? What if she could create predictable, affordable access to everything from routine medications to major surgeries? Victoria spent 3 months developing the framework. Members would pay a monthly fee based on their health profile and needs. In return, they would get access to MedBridge's entire network of international suppliers, verified medical providers, and cost-saving services. Instead of paying thousands for individual emergencies, members would pay hundreds for comprehensive coverage. The business model was brilliant in its simplicity. Victoria wasn't competing with insurance companies. She was replacing them entirely for people who were already falling through the cracks of the traditional system. Her target market was the millions of Americans who were underinsured, uninsured, or facing medical costs that exceeded their insurance coverage. But turning the concept into reality required resources Victoria didn't have. She needed technology infrastructure, expanded supplier networks, medical staff, and significant working capital. Most importantly, she needed credibility with potential members who would be trusting her with their most critical healthcare decisions. Victoria's approach to raising capital was unconventional, but brilliant. Instead of seeking traditional investors who might not understand the healthcare access problem, she went directly to the people who needed her services most. She created a founder membership program where early adopters could pay annual fees in advance in exchange for lifetime access to all MedBridge services. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, Victoria had pre-sold $1. $2 million in founder memberships to people who were desperate for an alternative to the current healthcare system. These weren't wealthy investors. They were ordinary people who had been financially devastated by medical costs and were willing to bet on Victoria's vision because they had no other choice. With this funding, Victoria began building the infrastructure for what would become HealthBridge International. She hired medical professionals to create treatment protocols and verify international providers. She developed technology platforms that could manage complex international logistics while maintaining HIPAA compliance. She established partnerships with medical facilities in 12 countries, all verified for quality and safety standards. The key innovation was Victoria's verification system. Every medication supplier, medical provider, and treatment facility in the HealthBridge network had to meet standards that often exceeded US requirements. Victoria understood that trust was everything in healthcare, and she built verification protocols that were more rigorous than most traditional healthcare systems. By the end of year 4, HealthBridge International was serving 2,400 members and had saved them a collective $8.7 million in healthcare costs. Victoria had created a legitimate alternative to traditional healthcare that was both affordable and high quality. But the real breakthrough came when Victoria realized she could scale the model internationally. American expatriates living abroad were already accessing high-quality, affordable healthcare in their host countries. What if she could create a reverse system that helped Americans access that same quality and affordability without leaving the country? Victoria began establishing HealthBridge offices in countries with excellent healthcare systems and low costs. Costa Rica for surgery and dental work. Thailand for specialized treatments and wellness programs. Germany for cutting-edge diagnostics and experimental treatments. Each location was staffed with bilingual medical coordinators who could help American clients navigate local healthcare systems. The expansion strategy was methodical and data-driven. Victoria analyzed cost differentials, quality metrics, and accessibility factors for hundreds of medical procedures across dozens of countries. She created a comprehensive database that could instantly tell members where to get the best combination of quality, cost, and convenience for any medical need. The financial results were extraordinary. By year 6, HealthBridge International was generating $47 million in revenue and serving over 15,000 members. Victoria had proven that comprehensive healthcare access could be both affordable and profitable. But the personal satisfaction went far beyond financial success. Victoria was receiving letters from families who had avoided bankruptcy because of HealthBridge services, parents who could afford their children's medical treatments, seniors who could access medications without choosing between food and prescriptions, people with chronic conditions who could maintain their health without destroying their financial security. The business model had evolved into something much more sophisticated than Victoria's original medication import service. HealthBridge International now offered everything from routine prescription access to complex surgical coordination, from preventive wellness programs to emergency medical evacuation services. Victoria's method had 3 core components that made it revolutionary. First, comprehensive cost transparency that showed members exactly what healthcare services actually cost versus what they were charged in the US system. Second, quality verification systems that ensured international providers met or exceeded American standards. Third, personalized care coordination that treated every member like family rather than a number. The success attracted attention from major healthcare organizations and investors. Victoria began receiving acquisition offers in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but she turned them all down. She had learned that the moment she sold to a traditional healthcare company, the mission would be compromised, and the cost savings would disappear. Instead, Victoria chose to expand through strategic partnerships with employee benefit companies, union health funds, and self-insured employers. She created B2B versions of the HealthBridge model that could serve thousands of employees while maintaining the personalized service that made the original concept successful. Today, at 60 years old, Victoria Chen stands as the CEO of HealthBridge International, a company valued at $1.8 billion that serves over 400,000 members across 47 states and 12 countries. The woman who was given 6 months to live now employs 2,800 people and has fundamentally disrupted how Americans think about healthcare access and costs. But the numbers, impressive as they are, don't tell the complete story of what Victoria has built. Her company has saved members over $2.3 billion in healthcare costs over the past 6 years. More importantly, HealthBridge has prevented an estimated 47,000 medical bankruptcies and helped over 180,000 people access treatments they couldn't otherwise afford. Victoria's typical day begins at 5:30 a.m. with a review of overnight operations reports from HealthBridge facilities around the world. The company now operates 24/7, with medical coordinators in different time zones ensuring that members can access support whenever they need it. She spends her mornings in strategic meetings, reviewing expansion opportunities, analyzing cost trends, and developing new service offerings. But Victoria insists on maintaining direct connection with the members who made everything possible. Every Tuesday, she personally calls 5 HealthBridge members to check on their experiences and gather feedback. These conversations keep her grounded in the real impact of her work and often provide insights that drive company innovations. The headquarters of HealthBridge International occupies a modern office complex in Austin, Texas, but Victoria chose the location deliberately. She wanted to be far from the traditional healthcare industry centers of power, and she wanted to create a company culture that reflected her values of accessibility, transparency, and genuine care for people facing health crises. Walking through the HealthBridge offices, you can feel the difference from traditional healthcare companies. The walls are covered with thank you letters from members, photos of successful surgeries performed abroad, and testimonials from families whose lives were changed by affordable healthcare access. Every employee understands that their work directly impacts people's ability to survive and thrive despite serious medical challenges. Victoria's personal office is modest, decorated with pictures of her daughter Emma, now a practicing physician, who serves on HealthBridge's medical advisory board, her grandchildren, and some of the members whose stories have touched her most deeply. She keeps a simple plaque on her desk that reads, "6 months to live became a lifetime to serve." The cancer that was supposed to kill Victoria remains in remission, managed through a combination of treatments that she accesses through her own company's services. The irony isn't lost on her. She has become her own customer, using HealthBridge to access cutting-edge treatments at a fraction of what they would cost through traditional American healthcare channels. Victoria's leadership philosophy is shaped by her experience as a patient facing impossible choices. Every company decision is filtered through a simple question. How would this affect someone like I was 6 years ago? Desperate, scared, and running out of options. This perspective has kept HealthBridge focused on its mission, even as it has grown into a major corporation. The company has attracted significant investment interest, with multiple private equity firms offering valuations that would make Victoria one of the wealthiest women in America. But she has consistently chosen growth strategies that maintain member control and mission alignment over maximum profit extraction. Victoria learned the hard way how healthcare systems can prioritize profit over patient welfare, and she refuses to repeat those mistakes. Instead of selling, Victoria has chosen to take HealthBridge public through an innovative structure that gives members voting rights proportional to their years of membership. This ensures that the people who depend on the company's services maintain influence over its direction, even as institutional investors provide capital for continued expansion. The expansion plans are ambitious but carefully managed. Victoria is opening HealthBridge medical centers in Mexico and Canada to provide direct care options for members. She's developing partnerships with medical schools to create training programs for healthcare providers who want to work in the international medical access field. Most significantly, she's working with policymakers to create regulatory frameworks that could make HealthBridge-style services available to all Americans, not just those who can afford membership fees. Victoria speaks regularly at healthcare conferences, medical schools, and business schools, sharing both her personal story and the business model that grew from it. Her message is consistent. Healthcare access is a solvable problem that requires innovation, transparency, and genuine commitment to serving people over profit. She has written a book about her experience, titled 6 Months to Forever: How Terminal Diagnosis Became the Birth of Hope. All proceeds go to a foundation that provides HealthBridge services to low-income families who can't afford membership fees. The foundation has served over 12,000 people and represents Victoria's commitment to ensuring that healthcare access isn't determined by financial resources. But perhaps Victoria's greatest pride is in the culture she has created at HealthBridge. The company has one of the highest employee satisfaction ratings in the healthcare industry, and turnover is virtually non-existent. People come to work for Healthbridge not just for careers, but for the opportunity to be part of something that makes a meaningful difference in the world. Looking back on her journey from terminal diagnosis to billion-dollar healthcare empire, Victoria often reflects on the unexpected gifts that came from her darkest moments. The cancer that was supposed to end her life became the catalyst for discovering her true purpose. The financial devastation that nearly broke her became the motivation for building something that could protect others from the same fate. Victoria's story resonates with audiences because it represents something uniquely American: the ability to transform personal adversity into solutions that serve others. She didn't just survive her cancer diagnosis. She used it as the foundation for building something that has helped hundreds of thousands of other people survive their own healthcare crises. Today, as Victoria reviews the latest membership growth numbers and reads testimonials from families whose lives have been changed by Healthbridge services, she often thinks about that conversation with Dr. Reynolds 7 years ago. The 6 months she was given became the beginning of the most impactful period of her life, proving that sometimes our greatest limitations become our most powerful motivations. The empire Victoria has built will outlast her, but more importantly, it has created a model that others can replicate and expand. She has proven that healthcare access is not just a noble goal, but a sustainable business opportunity, and that serving people in their most vulnerable moments can be both profitable and transformative. End of the story. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories of overcoming